Well, hello everybody and welcome to this panel discussion. I think it's an exciting topic today, higher ed as an export, global student trends. So we have a very well-known set of panelists today with us. I will introduce myself very quickly. I'm Alejandro Caballero, Global Education Specialist with the IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank. And I think the topic today is very timely. Some of the projections that we've done at the World Bank suggest that there's going to be a significant increase in the total number of higher education students around the world. I just had these statistics. There's expected to be 377 million students by 2030, growing to 471 million by 2035, and to 594 million by 2040. And this represents an increase of about 281% over 30 years for the period 2000 to 2030. And obviously, what we're starting to see is that global student mobility is a key trend, and we're going to be seeing much more of this, in particular from the global south to the north, but hopefully as well from southern countries to southern countries. So that's something that we're expecting to happen, and we're starting to project how this will shape up over the next few years. Just to give you a little bit of an example, the share of students in higher education in some of the most populous developing economies is expanding. For China, in 2013, China represented 17% of the total number of higher education students. Today, they're representing 27% with an expectation of 2030 share. In the case of India, it was 14% in 2013, and the projections for 2030 suggest that this will be 23% of the total share of higher education students around the world. And US is still a very important country when it comes to higher education, about 14% of in 2013 of the total share of global students. But this is reducing to about 8% by 2030. Again, just to give a few numbers that will hopefully put the conversation today in a little bit of global context about what's going to happen. I'm going to introduce very quickly my panelists today, and in no particular order, but I'm going to start with Joe Johnson, who's the chairman for FutureLearn. Welcome, Joe, to the discussion. Esther Benjamin, who is the CEO and Executive Director of World Education Services. Welcome, Esther, to the discussion. Martin Basiri, the CEO of Passage, and also an accomplished entrepreneur with companies like Apply Board that many of you know, obviously. Rohit Sharma, who's the Global Higher Education and Workskills Vice President at ETS. Welcome, Rohit, to the discussion. And last but definitely not least, Clare Rawlins, who's a Vice President with Student Recruitment and Marketing at Kaplan International. Welcome, Clare, to the discussion. So we're going to kick off today's discussion by having each panelist do a little bit of a quick introduction about their organization. So why don't we start with you, Esther?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's great to be with everyone here. I'm with World Education Services, WES. We are a global social enterprise, and we're focused on the global mobility and success of international students, immigrants, and refugees. Every year, we're evaluating the academic credentials of about 500,000 students who bring us about 600,000 credentials. And those credentials are from over 200 countries and territories around the world. We work with about 50,000 universities worldwide to validate and authenticate credentials. And we also have a social impact arm that takes on programmatic, philanthropic, and policy and advocacy initiatives, also aimed at improving conditions for those we serve.
Thanks, Esther. Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Alejandro. FutureLearn is a digital learning platform in the UK. We were set up about 15 years ago by the Open University to provide a platform for the UK higher education system to reach learners around the world. Pretty much all the UK institutions are or have been on the FutureLearn platform. and we reach today about 20 million learners at any one point in time.
Thanks so much, Joe. Martin.
Yeah, I was an international student in mechatronics. I came from Iran, and I help other people. And accidentally, we started a company called ApplyBoard to help our classmates, and then it became very big. We helped over 700,000 students from all over the world to come to US, Canada, Australia, and the UK. And while building that, we fell in love. First, we built it just because we were like nerd engineers. We wanted to build a website that other people use it. And then when we started like saying, oh my God, like we are changing people's life, we fell in love to the mission of educating the world. And we kept talking about the mission, and like I developed this dream that one day every human being on planet Earth have access to good quality education. And then I figured out that like technically all the students that come abroad except the 5% that get the scholarship, the way that I came to Canada, because the University of Waterloo give me $52,000, they don't have money. So all of the students that they come today, they're from the top 1 to 3% wealthy of their countries. So technically, these are millionaires of their countries. And the true access to education won't ever happen if there's no money, if the average person, middle class, can't come. So first I thought to start it as a philanthropy, and then we started like as a full-on company called Passage to provide financial access to refugees and underprivileged students from all over the world who they deserve to come abroad and change their life and break the cycle of poverty for themselves, but they don't have money to do it. So we are attacking that problem.
No, thanks, Martin. Thanks, exciting, obviously, pathway you've had with ApplyBoard as well. Over to you, Rohit.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Alejandro, and good morning, everyone. I'm with ETS, and we are a young 75-year-old company, and we'd like to think of ourselves as an education and talent solution provider that are helping and enabling lifelong learners to be future ready. Many of you know us as the testing company, and we are repositioning or thinking of ourselves as we move into the future of how do we provide the right signals to individuals, to organizations, to people who use the scores that our test takers eventually take, to open up pathways and opportunities. Today we do it through several of our products. Some of them are very popular, and many of you may have taken it, either the TOEFL or the GRE as an example. But we also recently acquired a company called PSI, and through that we are serving the workforce side of the whole education to workforce continuum, which serves the credentialing and licensure market. So altogether, we today impact around 50 million learners every year, and our mission is to continue to improve upon that number, but also make sure that our assessments are used to help open up pathways and opportunities for both upward mobility as well as for reskilling and upskilling.
Thanks, Rohit. Clare.
Hi, I'm Clare Rawlins with Kaplan. Kaplan's been supporting students and universities for 85 years now and is part of the Graham Holdings Group. I work in our university partnerships team, where we support universities in the UK, Australia, America, Canada, and New Zealand with their internationalization strategies.
Thank you, Clare. And we're going to start the panel with a question for Esther, and I would love to get Joe's view as well. What are the current factors driving the expansion of global student mobility? Esther, your views.
Yeah, Alejandro, you began with some of the numbers where we're coming from. About 2 million, excuse me, 2 million international students back in 2000 to 6.5 million today, and growing to 2030 and beyond by significant numbers. All of us in this room speak about international students so much, but I think it's important to remember that when you look at the total number of university students around the world, international students are just a small percent of that number. Only 3% of university students around the world, 3% are international students. I think we lose track of that, and I think we need to imagine a world where there are even more international students. So what is driving this? I would point to, first, the supply and demand equation. Populations rising, the middle class expanding, the demand for higher education obviously growing so significantly in key countries, and the supply just isn't there. I worked in South Africa for many years, and as the middle class grew, the university seats never expanded. So that is the number one factor driving all of this. Number two, I would point to international students, those who can afford it, those who are going overseas, are looking to go to countries where they might spend 5 to 10 to 15 years studying, living, immigrating, and so on. So this isn't just about studies. This is about people who are pursuing employment opportunities. This is about people who are looking for pathways to permanent residency. And all of that is sort of overlapping now in ways that we did not see before. Third and final, I would point to the fact that we are seeing in the world something today we've never seen before. And that is the fact that there are 100 million people who are forcibly displaced. And there are no clear legal pathways, humanitarian pathways for these individuals to consider moving overseas. And we are seeing increasing numbers of people. Because of the lack of pathways, they are pursuing international student options as a pathway to seek safety and to find freedom. So those are the three factors that I would focus on that are driving international student mobility.
No, thanks, Esther. And we'll have the opportunity to go deeper into some of these factors, but I would love to hear from Joe on this as well.
Thanks. Well, obviously, I agree, Esther, with everything you just said. It's a complex mix of push and pull factors that are driving international student mobility. So, lack of capacity, often in the sending countries, inability to accommodate the ambitions and aspirations of young people who seek employment opportunities that are unavailable to them in their home countries, educational opportunities unavailable to them in their home countries, and want the chance of finding them overseas. I would just temper all of those push and pull factors that are driving an increase with some forces operating in the other direction, which we shouldn't forget, which I think are going to slow somewhat the rate of growth that we've seen in the past 2 or 3 years. And we're clearly seeing it, and maybe we'll come to it later in our discussion, in some of the big destination countries that are pushing us fast into a sort of retrenchment phase in the policy cycle. So concerns around immigration, the extent to which students are actually seeking primarily an immigration route rather than an educational benefit is going to lead to some barriers being put up in the way of those students seeking these opportunities in other countries. And we've seen it in Canada in January, we're seeing it in the UK last year, and are likely to see more such action in the weeks and months ahead. We've seen it already in Australia, and we'll wait to see what happens in the US in November. So concerns around immigration in those big destination countries are going to be something of a brake on, I think, the big growth that we've seen in the past 2 or 3 years. But there are also other concerns around the traditional model of student mobility that sees students going from country A to country B, countries in the global south to those in the global north. Climate is a big one. I think the sector is really not even at the beginning of trying to understand how the traditional model of student mobility becomes more sustainable from a carbon perspective. It's not really given a lot of consideration in the debate, but I think it will increasingly attract attention from policymakers as the years go by. So I think that's going to be a break. And then I think cost. The traditional model of seeing students from the global south go to the global north, I think is going to be less important than the growth in the number of students and the proportion of mobile students going from the global south to the global south. The south-south direction of travel that you mentioned, for affordability reasons, and also perhaps also for cultural and academic relevance reasons. Perhaps programs there are going to be more relevant to the needs of learners in the Global South. Perhaps they're going to be more affordable and more targeted. So I do think the patterns are going to change significantly. And the traditional dominance of the big four markets, the UK, Canada, Australia, and the US, is almost certainly going to retreat at an accelerating rate, in my view. So I think the long-term secular decline of the global market share of those four big countries is going to accelerate, in my view, over the next 5-10 years.
And thanks, Joe, for bringing up all these relevant topics. Obviously, immigration, we're going to go deeper into that discussion and obviously bringing up some potential reasons for a slowdown, at least in the short term, of these trends and the need to diversify away from traditional countries, which is a key theme. And obviously, that south-to-south opportunity that it's so exciting for many of our students as well. I'm going to now turn it over to Clare and Rohit to explain a little bit. It seems that the concept of brain drain, which was a concept that we were talking about maybe in the 1990s, has significantly evolved towards one of brain circulation. No? And this opens more opportunities and more openness towards these models, even from a development standpoint. How do you assess these changes? And I don't know, let's start with you, Clare, and then we'll hear from Rohit as well.
Thanks, a great question. I think you're right. The notion of brain drain, the idea of a number of people leaving their home country, the talent, to the UK, to the US, to Canada, is really a notion that's outdated now. I think outdated for a number of reasons. I think firstly, the implication that only the talented people left the country and those left behind or in some way not the smart people feels incredibly outdated. And if we actually look at the populations of the country where we've traditionally spoken about brain drain, the talent in there is immense and not recognized by that term. So I think that's one fundamental issue with the term brain drain. But I think secondly, it's not representative of what's happening now. Really, as Joe touched on earlier, we're seeing students move from China to Singapore, to Malaysia. We're seeing that reverse of the flow, which is starting to accelerate. And I think there's a number of reasons behind that. I mean, the global rankings are a great example of that. If we look at the change in the world top 100 universities now, traditionally dominated by the traditional destinations, we now have something like the University of Singapore in the world top 20. Now that's an attractive destination for students all across the Global South and also the Global North. So I think the rise in rankings, cultural interest, I think Joe's point on the curriculum was really relevant. The notion of decolonizing the curriculum is obviously ever present in UK universities. But how far has it really gone? Is a student able to access content that's far more relevant, far more pertinent within their own region? Also, obviously, the tragic events of this world are making students look to study elsewhere. But I think rather than a brain drain, we're really now seeing a global flow of knowledge. Knowledge flowing around the world in a much more circular fashion. And I think that's very much something we'll see continue. But over to you, Rohit.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Clare. I'll touch more on the recirculation part and the circulation part of talent that's happening. And I think largely it's driven by a couple of phenomena, including the way globalization has happened and rising income levels. As you were mentioning, the notion that, partly brain drain was happening because the ability to move back was less attractive. Both the ability was less options were available and it was less attractive. So if you think about students who may have come to one of these countries in the late 70s, the differential in the income levels that you had post your education was just humongous. And as a result, that was one factor. And so people who came used to generally stay back in many cases. And as a result, brain drain was happening. The second was also opportunities back home were also limited. And so as we start to think about what has happened, rising income levels, many of us have teams globally around the world, and in many cases, especially in senior levels, the income differential or the salary differential is very little between many developing countries and developed markets. Opportunities are, in some ways you could argue, for many of the source countries that are there, it's growing at much faster rate. People are looking for more opportunities, and even though you may come for an education in one part of the world, you are ultimately, as a talent, you're going to where the opportunities are. And so all of these are leading to the circulation of talent and not necessarily a one-way flow that used to be more prevalent perhaps a few decades back.
Thanks for pointing to these changes in perceptions about the sector. Let's maybe turn it over now to some of the things that Joe raised in his first statement. There seems to be some traditional patterns. I mean, there's maybe more students moving into international options at the graduate level, but this is starting to happen at the undergrad level as well. There seem to be a few destination countries like US, UK, Australia, Canada, but I mean, we talked a little bit about diversification. There seem to be a few countries in the global south that are attracting significant part of the students that are moving globally. I was having some discussions over the conference here, and it seems obviously China and India are there, but what about Nigeria, Ghana? I mean, these are countries with significant number of outgoing students as well. But there was the conversation around potential expansion of south to south opportunities as well. I would love to hear your view, Martin, and I have not forgotten about you, by the way, so I would love to maybe start with you, hear your perspectives on this, and then I think I'm gonna turn it over to Esther and Joe also for some thoughts on this. I mean, what about, how are the trends changing, and maybe you can leverage your own experience at Apply Board and Passage.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing about international education, but generally immigration, we have to identify that this is what humans do naturally, and not the last 100 years. They used to do it from the first time we became human, and not even us. Also, animals do that. Every single species always go where the opportunity is more for reproduce more. This is natural, this is on our DNA. So if you look at from the moon, if all of us were right now in the moon and look at the earth, there is no line called countries. It's like one beautiful earth, and it's 8 billion people all moving naturally as their DNA telling them where to go, that they're like most resources. And any barrier to them called visa, language, those of them naturally go away. So talent always go after opportunities. Opportunities normally create with capital, and this balance is amazing. You see it in a lot of countries that like people go from one place to another place. Now we see a lot of people that go from Europe and North America to countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, not for education, but for work. And now the education is like UAE becoming one of the hosts for international education, and a lot of people going there. The main thing that Joe also mentioned a little bit on it is like, there is two main aspects on international education. One is, I don't have access to my country, like we are, like let's say I'm Nigeria, only 18% of people have access to any form of higher ed. Of the 18%, only 3% have access to a kind of a good higher ed, like out of the whole society. I want to get out so I could access to good higher ed, right? Second is, I want to get out actually as a form of immigration. And for the host countries, there's also two things. One is, I have an industry of education. I'll educate people for the form of like the revenue stuff that I generate, and to enrich my campus so my domestic students also get to see another person from another country, because tomorrow this person gonna make a global company or work in a global company. They gotta get exposure to different cultures and everything. And the other thing is a form of immigration. And I wanna like click in on this for Canada, just give you guys like what a huge benefit it is to a country like Canada. I studied the last 20 years income tax of every single immigrant in our country, right? Of course, like, I don't know their names, but the aggregate numbers. And there is not a single group that get anything close of all the people who came to Canada with a permanent residency. There's not a single group that is close to the level of income or the growth of income after getting the permanent residency than international students. So if I'm a country that my fertility rate is 1.3, like Canada, and my labor growth in the last 10 years was almost 15%, I need talent. Now I need to bring immigrant. I can bring someone who has studied Bachelor of, call it engineering in Nigeria, or I can bring someone and educate them myself. The data shows is black and white, like how much more beneficial if they get domestic education. So we need to break that stigma of like international education as a path to immigration. Because of domestic political, it was always a little demonized that these people come to stay. Yes, we want them to stay because they're the best source of talent. Not only for the source of talent for the economic class, even for refugees. When you look at it, like for example, Canada is a country that we bring a lot of refugees. Their income after year 5, they don't even get to $20,000. Means, like, and only 50% of them filing tax. What does it mean? Means like 50% of them, they never made income over $15,000 to file a tax, and the other 50% on median, they only made $20,000. But then you look at the refugees who go to university, their year 5, they get to 55,000, which is higher than the economic class that we just bring people from outside. Means even when we think about refugees, we should bring people and educate them. That's why in Passage, 10% of our students, right now we're bringing girls from Afghanistan, and we put them in the university system because we want to show the government with data how much more beneficial it is. Even when you want to do humanitarian, bring them, educate them, and have them live with dignity. Let them earn income. Let them be someone in the society and then learn the things. So these trends that Western countries' fertility rate going down very fast will the next 20 years completely change a lot of international education to more the best pathway for immigration.
No, thanks so much, Martin, for bringing up the case of Canada, which is a very good example of how these different dimensions intersect. No, the idea of immigration, the idea of the need for labor, obviously the policies of the country, and also the relatively large number of refugees going into the country. Joe, what are your views, perspectives on this?
I always love hearing Martin because he puts things so beautifully sometimes. Looking at the world like down from space, you know, obviously that's a nice way of thinking about and a rational way in many ways of thinking about the need for skilled immigration in countries with declining birth rates. However, the real world is that politicians and the way our political systems work don't allow that in the short term. So while you might be right in a sort of a 100-year, 200-year, 1,000-year view, in the short term, the political barriers to mobility can be very real and are very real. And, you know, take the UK, we've got a birth rate of 1.5 per woman, so well below replacement rate. But does that mean the political class is suddenly embracing immigration and suddenly embracing student mobility as the answer to our declining fertility rates? No, clearly not. We're erecting barriers to immigration, and there is no sort of rational approach to the problems you posed. So yes, of course, you know, skilled migration is a great long-term solution, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be the solution which our political systems actually adopt in the short to medium term. So I would just put that note of caution in. I mean, the UK, the benefits international students bring to our system are absolutely overwhelming. £40 billion to the UK higher education system every single year. It's a massive, massive number. And those are very real economic benefits. And they are understood by our political system. And the way our universities would be imperiled financially, the way our research ambitions would not be met if we didn't have that massive flow of income. is actually understood, but those economic benefits are actually outweighed in the minds of many politicians by the disbenefits that levels of immigration bring, of which student migration is a part. So that is the problem, is that the perceived disbenefits outweigh the enormous social and economic benefits. And that's the challenge which advocates of student mobility need to overcome. They need to actually address the disbenefits and minimize those in order for us to have a rational policy approach.
No, thanks so much, Joe, for sharing your perspective. And there's benefits to the incoming countries, but there's benefits as well to the countries of origin, and we'll get to that later in the discussion. Esther, any views on this? I mean, we've heard different perspectives from Martin and Joe. What's your view?
So we're seeing some things change and some things not change. So in traveling to so many countries where international students are sort of coming from the source countries to destination markets, bottom line, if you can afford it and you can get in, students are opting to go to the big four countries. That is not changing. We are seeing many more English taught programs, and I think that is a development over the last 5 to 7 years. So I'm seeing for the first time Indian students in large numbers going to countries like Germany and France and Sweden. That's not something we saw before. So the rise in English taught programs is a significant development. You mentioned the South-South travel or South-South mobility. We are seeing more of that. And I think a significant factor driving regional mobility is that there are now recognition conventions in place in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. And that is a development over the past 5 to 7 years. And in Latin America, it is as recent as 2022. The Lisbon Recognition Convention was in '97, but now with the regional conventions in place for recognition of credentials, people in Latin America and other regions can go to neighboring countries and travel home with their degrees. So that is a major development as well. And even beyond that, I think we are seeing many international students look to other destination markets because the big four countries are becoming problematic in terms of the politicization of the issues, in terms of discrimination and bias and prejudice, and just safety considerations as well. And all of those are also driving international students and their families to consider other destination markets as well.
So I hear it loud and clear, Esther, on diversification as a key word when it comes to some of the emerging trends. I would love to turn it over now to Martin and Rohit, because availability of financing options and obviously the whole issue of affordability is key. I mean, we want international opportunities to really have a broad base of students with a diverse type of backgrounds, including students from lower income backgrounds included in this mix. What are your views on student finance? What can be done to increase affordability to make some of these opportunities available to those that need it most? Given that globalization, as it was mentioned today, it's a real trend. Martin, any views on this?
Yeah, first, it's an extremely hard problem. The reason that it has not been done at a bigger scale for the people who really need it, I'm not talking about your parents are rich and they put their home as a collateral. Instead of they pay cash, now they decide to take a personal loan and they send you. A real education that I'm a deserving student, I'm a smart, bet on me so I can go abroad and study and earn 50 times more. That hasn't been done because it's extremely hard problem. The entire world of finance looking for good returns. And the risk on this class for the returns, for the investors and the money to go after this class, they want to like such a return that is become so unaffordable for the students. So like imagine the student loan should be 45%, 50% to match the return that otherwise they rather put it domestically and earn 18%. What we want, like, we don't want like a 45% loan, right? That makes it almost impossible. It's a very, very hard problem. That's why I'm very excited to like attack it. Either we solve it or we fail and other people know how not to do it so they maybe be able to do it. So one key factor about it is that only 0.4% of the entire world money is in the foundations. And 99.6% of all the money in our economies are after earning money. So I was thinking naively, I can go to the foundations and ask an endowments and ask them, hey, you are a University of X and you have $40 billion on your balance sheet. Give me $2 billion so I can give it out. No, even when people donate to universities wants to make certain amount of income from it. And those income, they're making it completely rational risk and return. So only 0.4% of all the money that you see in the countries like US and Canada, I'm pretty sure globally probably is way less, is chasing pure impact. That makes it almost impossible to solve, but there are ways. I don't know what, but I know there is a way to solve this problem, because when I look at my class that we went to Waterloo, all of us got a scholarship for master's degree. All of us, in a year or two, we made $100,000. So there should be a way of trusting people that they don't have a credit score, but they're talented. It should be a way of trusting people who don't have a rich parents, but they have big ambitions. It should be a way of trusting people that they may don't have a big bank account, but they're willing to work 16 hours a day. What, I don't know, but we have to figure it out, because till we don't figure it out, 98% of this 8 billion beautiful human beings, they don't have access to a study abroad.
Rohit.
Yeah, we can help you measure exactly the kind of things that you want to measure.
I send you the bank account.
That's what we are good at. But not, as Martin mentioned, very difficult problem to solve. But I think countries and institutions need to look at it a bit more holistically to what Joe was mentioning as a counter to what Martin was proposing. There's a whack-a-mole going on, right? As the demand is not going to come down. The demand is there because of what, Esther, you were saying around rising income levels in developing economies, not enough quality supply. And so the demand is going to be there. Now, the demand is also going to be differently segmented. Not everybody can afford a $100,000 education, but perhaps a lot more people can afford a $50,000 education. And as a result, you're starting to see these flows happening to English taught programs. A lot of what Esther mentioned in mainland Europe is one. Southeast Asia is another hub where a lot of flow is starting to happen. And to solve that, entrepreneurs like Martin will need to come up with better solutions that exist in the market. So as an example, we at ETS, we have invested a small amount in a company called Empower that was, again, founded by other entrepreneurs, Manu being one of them. And the idea there is, again, looking at, these are data problems in some ways, if you start to think of that. How do you combine data that you have domestically from a student in their home country? And right now, at least the majority of what Empower does, as I understand, is on the graduate route. So there is data related to undergraduate education, what course you did, which city, which school you went into, what is your grades, if you were working, what was your income level relative in that country, and then combining it with what is the program you're going to get into, as well as the outcome of those programs, looking at historical data to make a risk-adjusted return on that particular, and betting on that particular individual if they were to come to one of these countries where they have to take a loan without having necessarily a collateral or a credit score. How do you forward to somebody $40,000, $50,000? So there are companies that are starting to solve for this, but we are just at the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole 97% of the 3% of the people come that can afford. We have to solve for the remaining 97%.
No, thanks, Rohit. And obviously, there's increasingly new models. Virtualization, digitalization is providing potentially international opportunities also to students that maybe don't necessarily need to move or can spend only a limited amount of time in other regions. So all of this is part of we need to bring minds and people to think about this issue of student finance, which is, I tend to agree, an unresolved issue in many geographies, in particular when it comes to equitable access. I'm going to turn it over to Clare for maybe the last question of the session, and I see the clock here ticking. Clare, I mean, what are the benefits that students bring to their countries of origin when they engage in international study?
I mean, conscious of time here, but I think students bring many benefits back to their home countries. I mean, it goes without saying, many students stay and work. They send money back to their families when they do that. They create a network, which when many of these students choose to return back to their home country or to the region they originally came from, help them with their entrepreneurial activities to build their businesses. They bring a different set of thoughts, as we all get when we travel, and they bring, opportunities to drive innovation. But I think the topic, really one Joe touched on earlier, that is almost just as important, is what benefits do the students bring to the country that's hosting them? And I think we've touched on that significantly. I mean, Kaplan commissions a piece of research along with HEPI in the UK, the Higher Education Policy Institute, which really looks at the tax impact, the financial gain to the host country of international students. And I think it's indisputable, the benefits they bring. But as Joe mentioned earlier, that isn't matched by the rhetoric we're seeing. I mean, I think 53% of the population are in a country this year which will have an election. As elections campaigns are continuing, immigration rhetoric is getting stronger and stronger. The concerns are being raised. And we probably need to be focusing more on the benefits those students bring to the country that's hosting them, rather than the benefits they can send back. But I think I better stop there.
No, thanks, Clare. And obviously, it's a whole set of benefits that we're seeing happening. I would like to give our panelists a big round of applause today. The conversation could go on for hours on this topic, but I think we've covered as much as we could in 40 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for being here today with us. Thank you so much.